King Midas of Phrygia wanted to turn the world into gold. He asked the god Dionysus to give him the power of alchemy, to turn things into gold. Dionysus, who owed Midas a favor, agreed. But then Midas found that everything, yes, everything he touched turned to gold, including the food and water he needed to survive. When his daughter came to tell him that the flowers no longer had a smell, he hugged her and she too turned to gold. Distraught, Midas asked Dionysus to take away that power which the god of fertility, wine, and madness did. No longer could Midas turn things into gold. That mad power left him. His sanity was restored. The desire to turn everything into gold or into some form of wealth is a story in Ovid's Metamorphoses. But it's also the logic of our entire social system. Accumulate, accumulate, that is Moses and the prophets, Marx wrote in Capital. What he meant was that the place of God had been taken by capital accumulation, which was now the only real deity that matters. That's fine and clear, but the question Marx asked is, how does capital accumulation take place? Certainly, it is not by theft alone, although theft does take place in our world. In this journey through capital, the reader finds a logical explanation for how, despite the efforts of the working class, wealth accumulation does not take place in their bank accounts, that wealth always seems to land in the hands of the capitalists. The capitalist appears like King Midas, touching commodities and making them turn to gold or to dollars. But this is mythical. The actual process is far simpler, although it requires Marx's careful scientific analysis to uncover it. And to uncover this, Marx studies every part of the system of the world, particularly its economic system, and discovers the hiss of surplus value extracted not in the realm of circulation, but in the hidden abode of production. In this lecture, The Journey Through Capital, I will review Marx's main argument in 20 points. Then, at the end, I will offer a few reflections on the book and what it means to us. First, wealth presents itself as an immense accumulation of commodities. Second, commodities are goods and services that are produced for sale by human labor. Fresh air or running water are not by themselves commodities until they are packaged for sale, as in our times. Third, commodities have a use value and an exchange value. Fourth, use value is qualitative, with diverse uses that depend on the consumer. These uses relate to the specific material form of the commodity, which satisfies our needs of whatever kind, whether the stomach or the imagination. 5. Exchange value is a quantitative social relation which allows two incommensurate commodities to be exchanged with each other at some ratio. 6. Beneath exchange value is value, which is what the exchange value expresses. Value is the socially necessary labor time it takes to produce a commodity. The exchange value can numerically represent the value of the commodity. 7. Each commodity, therefore, has two parts, use value and exchange value, with value lying beneath the appearance of exchange value. These two parts are equally present in the commodity of labor power, our ability, in other words, or capacity to work. It is this labor power that is sold by the worker to the capitalist. The use value or concrete labor is the kind of work, tailoring or computer programming. The exchange value or abstract labor is exchangeable, which means it is a cost to the capitalist and wages for the workers. These two forms of labor are integral to each other in the capitalist system, although the abstract labor form is determined in this process of capitalist exchange. Number 8. One commodity emerges as the main means to facilitate exchange and ordinary commerce, namely money. Money presents itself in the form of precious metals, another commodity to be sure, or of printed paper, which is fiat money, needing political support to give it legitimacy. The enforcement of trust for what is recognized as money is underwritten by political power. Number 9. Commodities are taken to the market to be sold for money, which is used in turn to buy other commodities. This is simple exchange, which is represented by Marx as CMC. You sell in order to buy. One commodity is exchanged for another, with money as the intermediate between the two commodities. Number 10. Something specific occurs, however, under capitalist conditions. The order of things is altered. Money is taken to the market where it's used to buy commodities. These commodities are then sold for money. In this case, you buy in order to sell. If the money used to buy and sell the commodities is the same amount, then the entire transaction is meaningless. What accounts for the increase of money in the transaction? What accounts for the formula M-C-M prime? This increase, Marx argued, is not explained fully by the old adage, buy cheap, sell dear. More is at stake here. How is money able to grow? Marx shows that the solution to this question is not to be found in the sphere of circulation alone, but in the production process. The answer, in short, is in the mechanism that produces surplus value. 11. To produce commodities, the capitalist must employ workers. The commodity that the workers sell to the capitalist is their labor power, or our ability or capacity to work. This labor power is a commodity. 12. All inputs into the production process, many of them already commodities, are transformed into the commodity being produced. The only input that delivers itself into the process and leaves the factory floor is the worker. The workers sell what they own, their labor power, to the capitalist. What the capitalists do with this commodity is to use it in the production process. The capitalists do not own the worker. They only own the labor power of the worker for a determinate amount of time. After the worker finishes their shift, they leave the factory floor to go home, replenish themselves, and return the next day to produce more commodities. This work, this social reproductive labor, is often defrayed without money exchanged into the family. In the time of their shift, the workers produce more commodities than is necessary to pay them. The surplus time for the utilization of their labor power delivers surplus value to the capitalist. 13. The capitalist attempts to increase the surplus value extracted from the worker in 3 different ways, 2 of which are laid out in capital, and the third of which is indicated marginally by Marx. A. By increasing the length of the working day. By making the worker spend more time at work for the same wage, the capitalist is able to extract more surplus value. This is known as the extraction of absolute surplus value. A familiar contemporary technique of extracting more surplus value is to increase the intensity of labor. Fewer coffee breaks, faster assembly lines. These are a subtle way to increase absolute surplus value. B. By increasing the productivity of labor power. The capitalist can expend more money to mechanize the factory or to better organize and train the workers. Higher productivity allows the worker to produce more commodities in each hour, which decreases their socially necessary labor time. This is known as the extraction of relative surplus value. Increased productivity also takes place in the sectors where the workers' consumption goods are produced. This has the effect of reducing the necessary labor time, which may or may not manifest itself as a reduction in normal wages and even an increase in real wages. C. By suppressing the consumption level of workers or the standard of living of entire parts of the world. Imperialism holds down wages in certain parts of the world, making the argument that people in those places have lower life expectations, so they can be paid less. In Capital, Marx noted that the capitalists try to push the wage of the worker down below the value of his labor power, but he excluded this form from his analysis based on the idea that labor power must be bought and sold at full value. This consideration, which we call super exploitation, is not immaterial for our analysis, since this is central to the discussion of imperialism. It is also central to socialist feminism, which pays correct attention to the unrecognized social reproductive labor. To reduce the value of labor power by suppressing consumption levels provides a third way to increase surplus value. In Capital, Volume 1, Marx makes it clear that there is an evolutionary advance from the harsh use of workers to their substitution by machines. In the section on machinery, he describes how women are still occasionally used instead of horses for hauling barges, because the labor required to produce horses and machines is an accurately known quantity, while that required to maintain the women of the surplus population is beneath all calculation. Hence, Marx writes, we nowhere find a more shameless squandering of human labor power for despicable purposes than in England, the land of machinery. 14. Surplus value is extracted from these mechanisms. It is important to know that although capital is also money, these are distinct categories. Money is the term used to describe the various forms of cash that allow a range of transactions, from the purchase of a cup of tea to the acquisition of a corporation. But when money is gathered together into a sufficient quantity and is able to do more than merely buy and sell goods for use, when money becomes a social force capable of self-expanding through the production process, then the money is no longer merely money, but has become capital. 15. A key concept here is exploitation. Three concepts are important for an understanding of exploitation: constant capital, variable capital, and surplus value. A. Constant capital is the value of the raw materials and the instruments of labor in the production process. These materials and instruments are collectively transformed into the commodity produced by the process. In the process of transformation, the raw materials and machines do not alter their value. Their value is preserved in the commodity. The value remains constant. B. Variable capital is the expense on wages and salaries. C. Workers produce more value than they are paid in wages. This extra value is surplus value. The workers sell their labor power for a set amount of money. When they start to work on the production of commodities, it takes them only a fraction of their working day to make enough commodities to cover their own wages. Marx calls that the necessary labor time. It was necessary because in different epochs and in different countries, it takes different amounts of goods and services to reproduce the workers' depleted labor power. In some countries, the standard of living is lower than that of others, which means the necessary labor time is also shorter. The remainder of the working day after the necessary labor time is the surplus labor time. It is the time that the worker spends producing commodities that are above and beyond the amount needed to be produced to pay the wage bill of the workers. Marx's concept, the rate of exploitation, is measured by using the categories of variable capital and surplus value. Variable capital is the share of the values produced in the process of production that goes to the workers. Surplus value, on the other hand, is the share of the values that goes to the capitalist. The ratio of surplus value to variable capital, or S divided by V, can be seen as a quantitative expression of the exploitation of workers, also called the rate of surplus value. 16. Capitalists must compete with each other to prevent their annihilation from economic activity. They must keep making improvements to their products, and they must keep making changes to their production process to increase their profit rate. This competitive element of capitalism tends towards greater socialization of labor and toward the more efficient use of resources, including labor power. This dynamic of competition advances the productive forces. 17. Volume 2 and Volume 3, both assembled by Engels out of manuscripts left by Marx, deepen the analysis about the complexities of the realm of circulation and the distribution of surplus value extracted in the realm of production. We learn about the possibility of balanced growth and equilibrium and about the terms of sectoral distribution, the so-called transformation problem in terms of profit, rent, and interest. Marx's writings outside Volume 1 offer a powerful statement about time, about how rapid turnover time, the swift velocity of M moving to M prime through the circuits produces a tendency for capital to seek rates of return where the time between investment and profit is shortened. This is the objective tendency for finance capital to eclipse other forms of capital and to drive a process for finance to shape the economy. 18. The astronomical growth of finance in our time has led some people to talk of a new epoch, a new phase of financialization. It is true that the financial sector has grown immensely, but the role of finance is not itself new. Interest is, with rent and profit, part of what Marx called the Holy Trinity. To understand the financial sector properly, we have to grasp Marx's distinction between productive and unproductive labor. This is not a moral distinction. The work of doctors and nurses is essential. It's essential and socially useful. But in terms of Marx's concept, it is not productive since it does not produce surplus value for the capitalists. Here's an example from Marx. A singer who sings like a bird is an unproductive worker. If she sells her singing for money, she is to that extent a wage laborer or a commodity dealer. But the same singer, when engaged by an entrepreneur who has her sing in order to make money, is a productive worker, for she directly produces capital. This producing of capital is what clarifies the distinction. The surplus value extracted from the production process is then divided between industrialist profit, bankers' interest, and landlords' rent. Banks play an important role in advancing credit. In our time, the amount of surplus value drawn into finance and away from the productive sectors has created an immense imbalance in the capitalist system. 19. An objective contradiction develops between the productive forces and the social relations of production, the latter forcing more and more workers into conditions of unemployment or underemployment and into various forms of social distress. The social wealth increases, the capacity to generate more social wealth increases, but social inequality also increases. This dual increase in wealth and inequality is inherent in the capitalist system. The inherent nature of this duality, wealth and inequality, objectively generates a series of crises for capitalism. 20. We are well aware of the great subjective limitations that lie before the workers' movements, including the limitations of their economic, trade union, as well as social and political fronts. The subjective weakness of the working class means that the majority of the people cannot properly take advantage of these recurrent crises to shape the world to the advantage of the workers. The task of the people's movement is to strengthen the confidence of workers and to build the organizational power of the working class. The task, in other words, is to build the subjective force of the working class, which would be capable of leading us into a socialist future. So there, in 20 points, the skeleton of Marx's Capital. It is an immense journey to read through Capital and develop a clear assessment of the contradictions which grip our lives. Marx continued to revise the 1867 version of Volume 1 for the Russian and German versions, and then the much transformed French version of 1872. Marx left behind an enormous corpus of these economic writings, from the Grundrisse to the 32 volumes of notes and commentaries that were produced in his last years. Publishers fretted about Capital, fearing, as Engels did, that it would be hard to read. Even the Russian censor agreed with this assessment, letting the book get through despite the fact that the author was a known revolutionary. Few people in Russia will read it, wrote the censor. Even fewer will understand it. But you have read it, and you understand parts of it. You will read it again. Many years ago, when I was teaching the book in Delhi at our Leftward Books office, I wrote the following in the syllabus. I do recommend a hard copy at some point. This is a demanding book, and it demands to be an important part of your library. I hope you agree.